Okay, this is the introductory shiur to Mitzvah's Talmud Torah Gedol and Mitzvah's tefila. This is a line in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah where he says the mitzvah of learning Torah, the mitzvah of study Torah, passing on Torah, teaching Torah, is greater than the mitzvah the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is greater than the mitzvah of tefila. Okay, so let's see what this sugya is. It's a great sugya. Gemara says like this. We're going to look at two contradictory Gemaras. Gemara number one, Gemara number two. Okay, the Gemara number one says as follows: Tana Rabbana, Chasidim Rishonim Hayishon Sha'achas Umispalin Sha'achas V'Chozin Rishon Sha'achas. The first Chasidim. That's an important word. Chasidim. It doesn't mean the Chasidim of today. You see with the payas and the strimals and everything. We'll see what it means, but it's like righteous people. We'll call it that. Okay, Chasidim Rishonim, they would wait 1 hour before they prayed. They would pray for an hour, and then they would wait 1 hour after they prayed. Okay, so that's 3 hours for Shachar, 3 hours for Mincha, 3 hours for Marav. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you're spending 9 hours a day davening. Where was your Torah learning? How did you keep your Torah learning? How did you not forget everything? And how did you go to work? But because the Gemara says they were Chasidim, their Torah was guarded. No, they didn't forget the Torah. And their work that they did was blessed. Okay, that's nice. Right, so so that's the first Gemara. The second Gemara says like this: Rav Elazar Amar. Rav Elazar says, "Safek kara kriya shema, safek lo kara. Chozer v'kara kriya shema." Let's say I wasn't sure if I read Shema, I didn't read Shema. I read Shema again. What do I get to lose? Safek hispalel, safek lo hispalel. Let's say I wasn't sure if I davened. Maybe I davened, maybe I didn't daven. Okay, so eno chozer hispalel. I don't daven. I don't say the brachos again. Okay, Rav Yochanan Omer, Avai, she's paladam kol yom kula. So Rav Yochanan disagrees, and he says, no, it would be wonderful if you daven the entire day. Okay, so that's the two Gemara. So first of all, we say like this: we say, is this something on our first Gemara? Is this something to strive for? Should we try to daven 9 hours a day? Right? Okay, because here Rabbi Yochanan seems to say that it would be wonderful if we spent the entire day davening. Or does it take away from Torah study? Right? Is that right? That's what this Gemara seems to say. That if you daven all day long, where would be your learning? So which one is it? What's the value here? Is the value that we daven all day long, we learn all day long? What's the better thing to do? Okay, so Tosfos says Hada Amar Leo. Well, Vaishis Paladam Kol Yom Hayinu Dafka Safek Hispalo. Right, so when Rabbi Yochanan said that it would be great if you davened all day long, he was talking about specifically in a case where you're not sure if you davened. But no, we learned before, if you know you daven, so then you should stop in the middle. You definitely don't daven the whole day. The Tosfos is very clear. This is only a case where you are not sure if you davened. Okay, the Rashba says like this: Had Amar Elazar safek ispal, safek lo ispal, eno chozer mispal. Right? Okay. Perish Golan Zal. So I think this is Rav Sajid Golan says as follows: Eno Rashai lachzor uispal the dimak far hispal. You can't go back and pray again. V'ika mishum Baal Tosef, right? Because you have a problem with Baal Tosef. Okay, so Rav Sajid Golan says you can't pray in a case where when you're not sure if you prayed, that's Baal Tosef. The Raavad says like this: Raavad Zal perish the eno chozer mispal, eno chayav. When he says that you shouldn't go back and daven again, that means that you're not obligated to daven again. But if you want to, you can. And then Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you are obligated to daven again. Because if you wanted to daven all day long, then you could. So that's a debate. So that if you're not sure, then you should definitely go back and daven. So a debate here between Tosfos and the Raavad as quoted by the Rashba, whether or not Rabbi Yochanan's principle that a person should daven all day long applies outside of a case where you're in Suffolk. Does that mean that for the average person, the person should daven all day long? The Gemara in Pesachim has the same quote from Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi says, Rashi says you don't have to worry about bracha v'tala, meaning that's our worry. Why would you not daven again if you're not sure? Because you might be making a bracha v'tala. You might be saying God's name in vain by saying a bracha you don't need to. You don't have to worry about that, says Rav Yochanan, because it would be wonderful if you said 25 Shemona Esreis all day long. That would be great if a person did that. Okay. Now, going back to our first Gemara that talks about davening 9 hours a day. Well, right? So, Hu Hayomer, right? So a couple of people point to this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos to explain how could it be, what happened to these people's learning? How can they know any Torah whatsoever if they're spending 9 hours a day in davening? So Hu Hayomer, Ein Bor Yirei a person that's foolish can't be someone that fears sitting. V'lo amar etz chassid. Remember, it said that the chassidim rishonim were the ones that daven 9 hours a day. You can't be am haaretz, lo amar etz chassid. You can't be an ignoramus and be a chassid, meaning that these people, the chassidim rishonim that would daven 9 hours a day, they were already huge talmidei chachamim, so that's why you didn't have to worry. Okay, I found this quote of the Nefesh HaChaim very interesting. The Nefesh HaChaim says, okay, well, let's ask, what were they doing for 9 hours, right? So an hour before, an hour after? Okay, so the Nefesh HaChaim, the Chaim Volozhin says, "V'az yachshav kilu who misulak mizeolam, who mibnei aliyah people that like great people that are they're like they're different worlds. They're like they're in such high levels of their avodas Hashem. Gam achar hatfila." Right, so even like before davening, okay, you get yourself further up, and you're all ready to daven. During davening, you have this tremendous kavana, and you can't think of anything else. You're on this high level. What were they doing afterwards? So it was very hard for them to come down from this high of avodas Hashem. It took them an hour. It was as if they were falling out of this spiritual greatness. They went from this high level to this low level. He quotes our Gemara. So that's what they were doing for the hour afterwards. Okay. The Shita Megabetza says as follows. So Yishlomar Deshad Detani B'Shar Bnei Adam Lav Dafka Ella B'Shu Partei Sagi. Right. So he says, hey, hold on a second. The Shita Megabetza says it's not an hour. They weren't sitting there for 3 hours. It wasn't an actual hour. It was a certain amount of time. Now Shita Megabetza makes a lot more sense to us because 9 hours is insane. But then you have to ask yourself a question. According to the Shita Megabetza, why did the Gemara say, "But you spent 9 of these time periods davening"? What about where's your Torah learning? That's strange. As the Shita Megabetza, it's very hard to understand how the Shita Megabetza didn't take the Gemara literally that 9 hours was 9 hours. Okay, we're not going to really try to figure out. Well, that's not going to be one of our questions. The Yerushalmi has a different text. There's a different girsa of our Gemara that talks about the 9 hours. See if you notice the difference. Right, they would wait 1 hour before they daven. They daven for an hour. Okay, and they would an hour afterwards. Emasai, but oskim b'Torah. Emasai oskim b'machtan. So when do they learn Torah, and when do they go to work? 9 hours a day already. Their days on tefila. Rabbi Yitzchak bei Rabbi Eliezer al yedei shehayu chasidim, because they were chasidim. Haisa bracha nisenes v'Torah. There was a bracha given to their Torah, or bracha notenes l'machtan, and a bracha was given to their work. If you remember the Bavli, when we saw our text in the Gemara in the Talmud Bavli, had said that their bracha, their Torah was guarded. Right here, the Yerushalmi says that Torah was given a bracha. So it's not a coincidence that they have a different text. So what was the source of the different text? Okay, I put this the text of these Rambams a little too small. I know, so I apologize. But let's see what the Rambam says. The Rambam says like this: a person has to split their time of their learning into 3 different parts. Shlish b'Torah shebechtav, shlish b'Torah shebal peh, v'shlish yoven v'yaska achris davar merishis. V'yatza davar midavar v'yidama davar l'davar v'yoven b'midos shatorah nedreshes pehem ad shiyoda heichu ha'ikar amidos v'heich yotza isra mutar v'chelot v'hen b'dvarim shalama v'pi hashmuach v'inyan zehu nikris gemara. So the Rambam says you have to take your learning and split into 3. 3 hours, a third of your time of learning should be in Torah shebechtav, right, like Tanakh. A third in Torah Shebal Peh, it's like Mishnayos and straight Pshat Gemara. And the last 3, what we call lumdus, learning things out from learning, understanding the concepts and the conceptual understanding and the mechanics of halacha. Okay? So, then the Rambam says this, there are 24 hours in a day. Okay? It's not for a person to sleep 8 hours a day. Okay? Then the Rambam says as follows. We're going through these quickly because I'm just trying to make a point here. Okay, how should a person's daily schedule look? So the Rambam says if you go to work, you should work for 3 hours a day. then your Torah should be 9 hours a day, split up into these three things. Okay, so now we're at 12 hours a day. Okay, right. So now, right, and then he goes through this thing again, how much time you should spend on different things. Okay, so that's 12 hours a day, right? In source number 13 here in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Parak Aleph Lach Yud Beis, he's got 12 hours a day, 3 hours a day working, 9 hours a day learning. That's 12. Sleeping 8 hours a day. That's 20 hours in your day, right? So if you have 20 hours in your day, how much time is left for davening, leisure, eating, right? So that gives you 4 hours a day for davening and leisure, right? Let's say you're going to sleep only 6 hours a day, okay? Because the Rambam doesn't say you have to sleep 8 hours. That's enough to sleep 8 hours. So let's say you only need 6 hours a day, and that gives you 6 hours for davening, eating, and leisure. So that means you don't have 9 hours a day for learning. So hard to see that the Rambam agrees with this Gemara that you should be spending 9 hours a day learning. Okay, then, okay, so now the Rambam says as follows. The Rambam says, mitzvah. There's no mitzvah that's as great as the mitzvah of Torah study. Talmud Torah is equal to all the other mitzvahs. Why? Because learning brings you to action. Therefore, learning always precedes doing all the time because learning brings you to doing. Okay. Let's say I have a mitzvah to do and I have Torah study to do. I have a chavrusa set up, a shiur set up like on a specific time, and mitzvah. Somebody needs help crossing the street. If there's somebody else there who's not learning and they could do the mitzvah, right? So then the person shouldn't stop their learning. But if not, then you should stop your learning. But ideally, Talmud Torah comes first. When a person dies, what are they judged on first? First on their learning, and then they're judged on all their actions. Therefore, a person, even if their learning isn't going to be, with the right mindset, they should still learn Torah. That's more important. That's the first thing they should do. Okay. What do we learn from all of those different Gemaras? Learn that Talmud Torah is really important and more important than everything else. Okay, let's look at some of the sources. These are we're going to use to set up our answers. Okay, the Rambam says this: in a person's actions, like the middle ground is always the best. So a person should always try to be in the middle. Okay, and the person that does this, we're going to skip through this whole thing, but the person that does this, that acts in the middle ground, we know the Rambam's golden mean that every midah has two extremes. Okay, so the person that does this, look at the last lines. The last line is nikra chacham. Okay, the last couple of words. He's called a chacham. A person that acts in the middle ground, that person is called a chacham. Okay, the Rambam says, a person that's much more careful on himself. If he goes to somewhat of an extreme, is called a chassid. So now we know what a chassid is. A chassid is a person who goes he goes past what the law requires of him, and past chachma. Now, you have a chacham, who's the person that acts in the middle ground, and the person that's very careful and goes even further, that person is called a chassid. Okay. Then the Rambam says like this: Ad emasai chayev l'mod Torah. Until when does a person have to learn Torah? I mean, until they're 70, until they're 80. Ad yom moso, no, until the day they die. Shneimar pen yasiru mevavecha kol yimei chayecha. Chol shiasak b'limud. Anytime that he doesn't learn, hu shocheach. If you go a week on vacation, I'm not learning this week, you're going to begin to forget your Torah study. Okay. Then the Rambam says these sources we're going to be using for to answer our questions. Amar Chachamim, bris krusa shekol shegiya b'toraso b'beis hamedrash lo b'meher al mushkach. There's a covenant sealed, right? That whoever learns in the Beis Medrash with like with effort, so they're not going to forget their learning that quickly. Okay. Then, here's key stuff. Rabba Chia, Rabba Chazeh, Rabba Amnuna, Daka Ma'arich B'tzilasa. So Rabba saw that Rabba Amnuna was praying very long. Right? He's spending a lot of time in prayer. Amar Manichin Chayolom, Voskim Chaysha. You're giving up the world, the eternal world, for a world of just this moment. Who suffers man tefila chud, v'zman Torah chud. So why did he daven for a long time? Because he felt there's a certain amount of time in the day that you're supposed to be praying, and a certain type of day that you're learning. Right? What does it mean chay olam? Like, what does it mean that eternal life? Torah, Rashi says, right? Torah. In other words, what you should be spending your time on is learning. right? Torah, tefila, tzarchai shahi, l'refuah, l'shlomo, mazonos. Why do we daven? Just for this world. Davening is only about this world. We don't daven for the next world. We're just davening for things that we want nowadays, right? We need health, we need peace, we need parnasa, right? That's for now. Talmud Torah is something that's eternal. So why would you waste your time on tefillah for Talmud? Rabbi Yirmiyah HaKayasif Kamei de Rabbi Zera v'Havu Aske B'Shmaisa. Nago Etzalei v'Hakam Esar Rabbi Yirmiyah Karela Rabbi Zera Masir Asno Mashma Torah Gan Tfilas Tuevas. He says we even have a pasuk in Mishlei. This pasuk that says, right, we apply to this case that somebody that forgets it, that puts aside his learning in order to daven, so even his tefillah is an abomination, right? As you think that we're crazy here, calling tefillah an abomination. Right, so we'll skip source 26. 27 says like this. It says Rasajagon, Amar al tishal al tachnunav shem derech nadava sheinu nonim. How do we understand this pasuk that says that somebody that doesn't learn Torah is his tefillah becomes an abomination? Right, so what does it mean? Al tishal tachnunav shem derech nadava sheinu nonim. Don't ask for these things. Af gam tefillah so shehi chova ena mekabas. Even your tefillah is not going to be answered. This is so obvious, he says. If a person doesn't listen to their master, why would the master listen to them? In other words, if you set aside Talmud Torah, if you're not going to learn and you're going to daven instead, so why should anybody listen to you? Right? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so he says okay, so and he says that now we see it's not only Talmud Torah. It says kisvei sofrim tefillin mezuzos masikin l'kriya shema ve'masikin tefillah. Right, the people that are writing Sefer Torah, the sofrim that write Torah, tefillin, and Sefer Torah and mezuzos, they shouldn't stop their learning. Now I'm a little confused here. I apologize because I must have skipped a source, like the most important source. Hold on, maybe we skipped it. Okay, I skipped source 18. This is the most important source. Okay, that I did that. Okay, so he says like this, right? He said, this is source number 17. I don't know how we missed this. Okay, source number 17 says like this. Okay, there were groups of, a chaver is not a friend, but there were groups of people that were trusted to learn Torah. They stop to say Shema, but they don't stop their learning in order to daven. It means they skip davening. That's not the average person. Come on, right? The average person has to stop their learning for davening, right? But that they learned all day long. They never stopped learning. So they didn't stop their learning even to daven. But he says, but us who are just average people, we stop for both. Okay. Says the Rambam, and here's the key to the whole shiur. Maybe this is cool that we did this last. So says the Rambam, right? If you're involved in Talmud Torah and now comes time to daven, so you should stop and daven. But let's say you're one of these people that you don't go to work, you don't do anything but learn. We're not talking about the kol guy that learns 15 hours a day. We're talking about the person that learns 21 hours a day. Okay, and you don't do any malacha. And now comes time for minyan, and you are learning. Eino posek, you don't stop your learning. Now look at what he says. Shemitzvah Talmud Torah gedola me mitzvah tefila, because mitzvah Talmud Torah is greater than the mitzvah of tefillah. V'chol osik b'tzarchei rabim k'osik b'divrei Torah. So, and whoever, right? Okay, fine, that's something else. Okay, so in other words, you don't stop. So now the question is, what does it mean that Torah study is greater than tefillah? What are we measuring? How do we decide this? What's the metric? What's the scale? Okay, that is the introductory shiur. I hope you'll join us for shiur. This is a really, really interesting sugya. Shalom.